Entitled, Mom demands I give up my plane seat so her precious angel can see out the window. I was recently flying back home after visiting my family for the holidays. I had booked a window seat specifically because I like to sleep on planes, and leaning against the window helps me doze off. Boarding the plane was the usual chaotic mess, and I was one of the last people to board. I found my seat, 23A, settled in, put my headphones on and closed my eyes, ready to just get this flight over with. A few minutes later, I felt a tap on my shoulder. I opened my eyes to see a woman standing in the aisle with a young boy, maybe around 6 or 7 years old. She was pointing at my window seat and had this expectant look on her face. I took my headphones off, thinking maybe I was in the wrong seat or something. She then says in this incredibly saccharine voice, "Excuse me, honey, would you mind switching seats with my son? He really wants to see out the window and you're in the window seat." I looked around and her seat was an aisle seat, 2 rows behind me. There were plenty of other window seats on the plane that were still empty when I boarded, so she clearly just hadn't booked one and was now trying to take mine. I politely told her, "I'm sorry, but I specifically booked this window seat. I'm not going to switch." I put my headphones back on, hoping that would be the end of it. Oh boy, was I wrong. She then starts loudly sighing and dramatically rolling her eyes. Then she leans in closer and says, in a voice that was definitely not saccharine anymore, "Well, that's just selfish. Don't you have any compassion for a child? He's never flown before and it's so important for him to have a window seat. You can't possibly be that heartless." People around us started to stare, which I'm sure was exactly what she wanted. I just stared back at her completely deadpan and said, "Ma'am, I paid for this seat. If it was so important for your son to have a window seat, you should have booked one for him. I'm not moving." I turned back to the window and pretended to ignore her. She then tries to pull the classic entitled parent move and says, "Fine, I'm going to get the flight attendant. They'll make you switch." And off she huffs down the aisle. I honestly almost laughed. Like a flight attendant is going to force me to give up my paid seat because her kid wants a window. Sure enough, she comes back a few minutes later with a flight attendant in tow, looking all smug. The flight attendant, bless her, listened to the mom's spiel, then turned to me and very politely asked if I would be willing to switch. I just repeated what I said to the mom. I booked this seat and I'm not switching. The flight attendant, probably used to dealing with this kind of nonsense, just smiled sympathetically at me and then turned to the mom and said, "I'm sorry, ma'am, but the passenger is within their rights to keep their assigned seat. We can't force them to move. Perhaps next time you can book a window seat in advance for your son." The mom went absolutely ballistic. She started yelling about how incompetent the flight attendant was, how rude I was, how I was ruining her son's first flight experience, and just generally making a huge scene. The flight attendant calmly told her to lower her voice and go back to her assigned seat, which she eventually did, grumbling the whole way. The kid thankfully seemed more embarrassed by his mom's behavior than upset about not having a window seat. The rest of the flight was thankfully uneventful, but the sheer audacity of that woman to demand my seat and then to try and make me feel like the bad guy for not giving in was just unbelievable. Honestly, some people think politeness is weakness. She thought she could bully her way into that seat, and when it didn't work, the tantrum started. If you see this kind of crazy in the wild, hit that like and subscribe button. Entitled influencer demands free cake and meltdown ensues when told no. I work at a small bakery in a relatively trendy part of town. We get all sorts of customers, but yesterday we had a truly special one walk in. A woman dressed head to toe in designer clothes, sunglasses perched on her head even though it was indoors, and phone permanently glued to her hand, strutted in like she owned the place. I immediately knew we were in for a treat. She browsed our display cases for approximately 5 seconds before dramatically sighing and announcing, "Ugh, you don't have anything I want." Charming, right? I plastered on my customer service smile and asked if there was anything specific she was looking for, hoping to salvage the situation. She rolls her eyes like I'm the biggest idiot in the world and says, "Duh, a custom cake," for my photo shoot, obviously. Okay, custom cakes are our specialty, so I figured maybe this could turn into a decent sale after all. I started asking her about the design, flavors, size when she needed it, the usual questions. She waves her hand dismissively and says, details. Doesn't matter. Just make it Instagrammable, something really aesthetic. Right, helpful. I tried to gently steer her towards giving me some actual specifics, but she just kept repeating variations of make it pretty and make it go viral. Then comes the kicker. She finally gets to the point and says, "So obviously this will be for exposure. I have like a huge following, millions of followers. I'll tag you in all my posts and you'll get so much business. So Yeah, the cake needs to be free. It's a collaboration. I managed to keep a straight face and politely explained, I understand you're an influencer, but we don't offer free products in exchange for social media exposure. We're a small business and we have costs to cover. We'd be happy to create a beautiful cake for you, but it would be at our regular prices. You would have thought I had personally insulted her entire family. Her face turned bright red, and she launched into a tirade about how I was an idiot, how I clearly didn't understand marketing, how she was doing me a favor by even considering featuring our bakery on her page, and how we were going to regret not jumping at this amazing opportunity. The volume of her voice was escalating rapidly, and other customers were starting to stare. She even pulled out the classic line, "Do you know who I am?" To which I wanted to reply, someone who expects free cake? No pay, but I restrained myself. I just calmly repeated that our policy was to charge for custom cakes, regardless of social media influence. She then threatened to leave us a bad review online, which honestly at that point felt like a badge of honor. She stormed out, slamming the door so hard the bell above it nearly fell off. Honestly, the best part was another customer who had been watching the whole thing came up to me afterwards and said, "Don't worry about her. Her millions of followers are probably all bots anyway, and I'll definitely be ordering a cake from you guys next week just to make up for her rudeness." So in the end, the entitled influencer actually boosted our business. Irony at its finest. Entitled neighbor thinks my backyard is a public dog park. I live in a suburban neighborhood with relatively small yards. I've spent the last few years in a small fortune turning my backyard into my little oasis. I put in a nice patio, planted a beautiful garden, got some comfortable outdoor furniture. It's my happy place. I have a dog, a golden retriever named Max, and he loves the yard too, but he's well trained and doesn't dig or destroy things. My next door neighbors, the Smiths, moved in about 6 months ago. Nice enough people, or so I thought. They have 2 small yappy dogs that they let run loose in their own yard, which is fine, whatever. But lately I've noticed their dogs have been visiting my yard. At first it was just occasionally seeing them sniffing around the fence line. Then I started finding little presents in my grass that definitely weren't from Max. I figured maybe they were just slipping through a gap in the fence, so I did a thorough fence check and didn't find any holes. I assumed maybe they were jumping over, which seemed unlikely for such small dogs, but I couldn't figure out how else they were getting in. I was starting to get annoyed, but I hadn't said anything yet, hoping it would just stop. Then, yesterday, I was working from home and looked out my window to see Mrs. Smith in my backyard. Not just in my yard, but actively playing fetch with her 2 dogs. They were tearing around my garden, trampling my flowers, and generally wreaking havoc. I was absolutely livid. I went outside trying to keep my voice calm and said, "Mrs. Smith, what are you doing in my backyard?" She looked up completely unfazed and said, "Oh, hi. Just letting the dogs get some exercise. Your yard is so much bigger and nicer than ours, and it's fenced in, so it's perfect for them to run around." Perfect for them? What about me and my yard that I pay for and maintain? I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "Mrs. Smith," I said, my voice starting to rise, "this is my private property. You can't just come into my yard and let your dogs run wild. Please get your dogs and leave." She actually had the audacity to scoff at me. "Oh, relax," she said, waving her hand dismissively. "It's just a yard and the dogs are having fun. They need to run, you know, it's good for them. And it's not like you're using it right now." "Not using it right now? It's my backyard. I plan to use it whenever I want." I pointed to my trampled flower bed and the dog poop that was now liberally scattered around my lawn and said, "Do you see what your dogs are doing? They're destroying my garden and making a mess. This is not a public dog park. It's my private backyard. You need to leave. Now." She finally seemed to realize I wasn't kidding around. She huffed and puffed, called her dogs, and begrudgingly herded them back towards the fence line. But as she was leaving, she had the nerve to say, "Well, you're not very neighborly, are you? Just trying to help out some dogs get exercise. You could be a little more considerate." Considerate? She was trespassing and letting her dogs trash my yard, and I'm the one who's not considerate? The entitlement was just mind-boggling. I'm now seriously considering putting up security cameras and maybe even a higher fence. Some people just have no respect for boundaries or other people's property. Trespassing and unsolicited dog poop gifts? That's a bold move, even for an entitled neighbor. Seriously though, what would you have done in this situation? Let me know in the comments. Entitled wedding guest throws tantrum over centerpieces? My husband and I got married last weekend, and for the most part, it was a beautiful day. We had a smallish wedding, about 80 people, mostly close friends and family. We tried to keep things relatively low-key and relaxed, but still elegant and fun. We put a lot of thought and effort into every detail, from the venue to the food to the decorations, trying to make it a special and memorable day for everyone. For our centerpieces, we opted for something a little different than traditional floral arrangements. We love books, and we're both pretty avid readers, so we decided to use stacks of vintage books as centerpieces, topped with small candles and some greenery. We thought it was a unique and personal touch, and it fit our personalities and the overall vibe of the wedding perfectly. We got a lot of compliments on them from most of our guests, who thought they were creative and charming. However, apparently not everyone appreciated our literary centerpieces. My husband's cousin, let's call her Tiffany, let's just say she's known for being a bit high maintenance and dramatic. From the moment she arrived at the reception, she seemed determined to find something to complain about. She made snide comments about the cocktail hour appetizers, complained about the music being too loud, and even rolled her eyes at my wedding dress, which for the record I thought looked amazing. But the real drama started when she got to her table and saw the centerpieces. I watched from across the room as her face contorted into a look of utter disgust. She dramatically waved over a passing server and, in a voice loud enough for several tables to hear, demanded to know, "Grouch, what is this supposed to be?" The poor server, clearly flustered, stammered, "It's the centerpiece, ma'am." Tiffany then launched into a full-blown rant right there in the middle of the reception. "Books? Seriously? You expect us to sit here and stare at stacks of books all night? This is supposed to be a wedding, not a library. These are hideous, they're dusty, they're blocking my view. This is the most ridiculous, cheap, and tacky centerpiece I have ever seen." I was absolutely mortified. My husband was equally stunned and embarrassed. Several people at nearby tables were openly gaping at her. The server, bless her heart, tried to politely explain that the centerpieces were the bride and groom's choice and that they were meant to be personal and unique. But Tiffany was having none of it. She kept ranting and raving, insisting that we were ruining the entire ambiance of the wedding with our awful centerpieces. She even started trying to rearrange the books on the table, making an even bigger mess. Finally, my husband, bless his patient soul, walked over to the table, put his hand gently on Tiffany's arm, and said in a very calm but firm voice, "Tiffany, these are our centerpieces. We chose them because we like them. If you don't like them, that's your opinion, but you don't need to make a scene about it and ruin everyone else's evening. Please, just try to enjoy the rest of the wedding." She huffed and puffed, crossed her arms, and sulked for the rest of the night. She barely spoke to anyone, and she definitely didn't crack a smile. Later, my mother-in-law apologized profusely for Tiffany's behavior, saying she was always like that. Apparently, this kind of entitled outburst was par for the course with Tiffany. It's just unbelievable that someone could be so self-absorbed and rude at someone else's wedding, all because of some centerpieces they didn't personally approve of. It's our wedding, Tiffany, not yours. Maybe next time she can plan her own perfect wedding with her perfect centerpieces and leave everyone else in peace. Dusty books and blocking her view? The entitlement is blocking a view of a normal human being. If you love these crazy stories, subscribe for more. Have an awesome rest of your day, everyone.